Welcome to Cosmic Comics. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Xorr, the God-Jewell, and the origin of all, most, or some humanoid races within the Marvel Universe. This story takes place over a 3-issue arc in Thor Volume 1, issues 214 through 216. Once, early in the Marvel 616's universe's history, existed a species called the Xorr. This species claims that it was they who began many and perhaps all of the humanoid races within the Marvel Universe. They claim to have spawned 1,000 lesser races. If we take their claim at face value, then we have to assume that they may predate the Elders of the Universe. Then, 6 million years ago, which seems all too short of a time for the claims to be legit, but maybe this is in Xorrian years. Their sun was on the verge of going nova. They had 2 centuries to prepare for the destruction of their world. They had many options available to them on how to deal with the problem. The easiest and most likely, leave the planet. But for some reason, the Xorr were extremely attached to the planet they called home. Their entire civilization centered around this one planet. They decided that if their race was going to survive, then the planet must survive as well. Their answer? Build machines. Big, huge, massive machines. And I love this next set of lines. Their size had no meaning in human terms. To say they drew the power of our entire planet would not give you the weakest image of their might. For the power of our planet was 1 trillion times greater than that of Earth. I'm not saying that these guys are lying, but it does feel like they're going a little over the top. When their sun finally went nova, these machines were used to create a giant force field-like shell of nuclear force. The force of the sun going nova sent the planet flying into deep space. No mention of how this great race managed to survive the sudden loss of their planet's rotation and change in trajectory. I hope they had everything nailed down and everybody was strapped in good. What about their planet's atmosphere? Okay, it's just starting to sound more and more like they just made this story up. As they were hurled out into space, their protective shield remained in place. Over a period of centuries, eons even, the planet changed and the shield contracted. As the shield contracted, the planet began to contract as well, until it was only 1,000th of its former size. Once again, this seems questionable as we get a pretty good idea of how large the God-Jewell is later in the story, and even at 1,000 times its current size, it would hardly be anywhere near the size of our moon, and nowhere even close to the size of a good planet. As both shield and planet shrank, eventually they coalesced together into a crystallized jewel. 1 million years ago, the jewel smashed into an asteroid in the dark nebula. Fast forward to the year 1973, where Thor's lover, girlfriend, or whatever she is to him, Lady Sif, and her friend Karnilla have been sold to miners within the Dark Nebula who are working on the asteroid in question. It's never made clear how it happened, but Sif and Karnilla have been absorbed by Xorr, the God-Jewell, who is planning to use their life energy to become gods within the Marvel 616 universe. Thor and an entire host of Norse gods show up looking for them. The miners are secretly working to free the jewel, but we're never told how they came to be here or why they are working on this project. One more quick thing to throw out, Thor had recently killed Mercurio, also known as the 4D Man, by turning his own powers against him. After dying, Mercurio didn't continue on to eternity as should have been the case, but instead ended up within a different level of space and was drawn into a mystic whirlpool. As he was hurled ever onward, he saw that he was being drawn towards a giant red jewel that he could hear having a conversation with itself. I bring this up because it shows that the God-Jewell, while trapped on the asteroid, also existed within some form of pocket dimension at the same time. Additionally, by talking to itself, there is the implication that this being doesn't act as a single entity, and that only portions of the crystal might be aware of what is taking place around itself at any given time, as one voice had to alert the other to Mercurio's presence. So, there's this entire side plot in this arc dealing with Mercurio and how he needs the power of the God-Jewell to save his home planet Gramos. I chose not to cover this plotline here because I may want to do an episode on Mercurio in the future and because I would have spent more than half of this episode complaining about how selfish Thor is, due to Thor telling Mercurio that saving his girlfriend, the Lady Sif, is far more important than saving an entire planet of peaceful living beings. So much for the greater good, right? Back to the story at hand. After Thor and his posse show up, the miners somehow get the jewel to surface, and the gods of Asgard are told to stop in their tracks or else be destroyed. The jewel then dumps the gods into an underground cavern, and shortly afterwards takes off for the skies. It appears as though the miners' true purpose was to build a spaceship so the jewel could leave the asteroid. It leaves the Dark Nebula, but the Asgardian host is hot on its trail. Thor then leaps down upon the crystal. As Thor raises his hammer to free Lady Sif, he is stopped by the jewel itself. It is at this time that the God-Jewell begins a transformation and finally takes on a humanoid appearance. Thor learns that he can't strike open the jewel because in doing so, he will destroy his lover Sif. Note that the reader is told, if one atom of this cosmic jewel be violently destroyed, so too dies Sif, because now she is joined with his crystalline flesh, her life but a pulse within him. This is reiterated at the beginning of the next issue, where Thor, while standing before a number of other Norse gods, threatens Odin's life if he doesn't stand down. The next couple of panels really shocked me, as Odin rolls over like a dog. Yeah, that just happened. Xorr then lets everybody know what his plan is. Xorr wants to reshape the universe into his image, but first he needs to absorb enough energy to restructure himself into the planet he once was. It's at this point that Xorr goes all Galactus. In fact, Xorr claims to be more powerful than Galactus, and his boast appears to be true as he sucks in multiple uninhabited planets and dying suns. Thor's only action during this calamity is to hang his head in shame. All the while, Odin continued riding along beside the God-Jewell and is slowly steering it in the direction he needs it to go. Odin's plan comes to fruition when he successfully gets the God-Jewell to start drawing energy from a giant star that is on the verge of going nova. Xorr happily begins pulling in the massive amounts of energy from the giant star. The narrator is kind enough to point out that we are never given a good explanation as to why Xorr would fall for this trick, and states it might be due to either greed or stupidity. Neither of these makes sense to me. After all, it was a star-going nova that forced the Xorrians into their current predicament, so I think they would have been careful about that. Why save yourself from something only to perish from the same fate a little more than 6 million years later? Also, the Xorrians have waited a long time for this opportunity, and I can't imagine that they would so hastily throw it away. The Xorrians are greedy, but up until this point, they've had a plan. In the end, I think that we, the reader, have to accept that this is nothing more than a plot device used to wrap up the story. Moving on. With the help of Mercurio, Thor is capable of freeing his damsels in distress with a mixture of ice and heat. I have a hard time believing that a being that is as powerful as Xorr could be open to such a method of attack. Furthermore, we are told previously in this arc that the process of absorbing the ladies into Xorr's crystalline structure had already begun and was seemingly irreversible at this point. Remember, Thor was told if one atom of the cosmic jewel be violently destroyed, so dies Sif. In modern comics, there would have been some form of consequence associated with this action, but here we are given nothing. It would have been nice to see one or both of them left with a crystalline limb, or for it to come out in future issues that the hive mind of the Xorrian people had remained intact within one of these two. Big deal! You're just nitpicking, some of you might think, and I am nitpicking. But we are told that Sif and Karnilla were joined with his crystalline flesh. We, the reader, deserve to know that once a narrative choice has been made, that the story will maintain consistency. Any divergence from that narrative deserves an explanation, consequences, or both instead of being blithely cast aside. Meanwhile, Xorr is still pulling in all the energy he can from the dying star. In Xorr's dying words, he continues to not reflect the character we were told he was in previous issues of this story arc. He's amazed by how much power he's pulling in, but this is a species that traveled space and time. gave birth to some of the greatest races in the Marvel Universe, and is already several magnitudes more powerful than Galactus. It just doesn't seem to fit the narrative that he would be so surprised that he could pull in so much power from one dying sun. Thor and their crew make their escape. Xorr is completely oblivious to their exit and shatters when the star goes supernova. Afterwards, ships from Gramos appear to collect the pieces of the shattered God-Jewell. The energy from these shards will be used to save Mercurio's homeworld. Note that had Thor been willing to work with Mercurio throughout this story arc, nearly all of the damage inflicted by Xorr might have been avoided. Lady Sif could have been saved much sooner, and she might not have been saved at all if Mercurio hadn't been willing to help out. Despite all that, Thor still closes the arc out by being a jerk to Mercurio. Mercurio points out that they could have possibly saved everybody a lot of trouble by working together sooner, whereby Thor brushes off the responsibility for his actions by stating that what might have been doesn't matter because, hey, they made good in the end. Entire solar systems were destroyed due to Thor's stubbornness and inaction, but whatever, right? Thus ends Xorr the God-Jewell, whose people gave birth to thousands of races, including our own. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Cosmic Comics. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. I'm out.